The story is told, though who can say if it be true, of a clan of medieval warriors awoken in modern-day Manhattan, of the animated series that told their story.
It is an age of darkness. Superstition and the sword rule. It is an age of fear. It is the age of gargoyles.
Welcome to Voices from the Eyrie, a Gargoyles podcast.
Hello and welcome to Voices from the Eyrie, a Gargoyles podcast. I'm Zach Joyner, webmaster and executive producer of the Spidey Dude Radio Network. Thank you for listening to the show. This show is powered by Spidey-Dude.com. It's part of the general network that powers it. You can support this show if you like via patreon.com/SpideyDudeNetwork. You can also leave us a voicemail, 818-925-6631. We'll play that voicemail in a future episode. We also like to get emails every once in a while. Be sure to leave us an email if you like, gargoylesvoices@gmail.com. Follow us on social media. At Spidey Dude Network on Facebook is the general network Facebook page. But you can also follow this exclusive Twitter handle, @FromErie on Twitter. Follow us there to get show updates at both places. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe if you're listening to us on YouTube. And if you're listening to us on your favorite podcasting app, you can always leave us a 5-star review, and we will read all of that feedback in a future episode. Want to give a shout out before we get started also is to our patrons, Scott and Venkman. Thank you for your support of this show and all the shows on the Spidey Dude Radio Network. As always, we thank all of our guests and our host for this show. And with that, I turn it over.
Welcome to our third episode of Voices from the Eyrie and our first deep dive into an episode of the show. We're finally here. I would like to introduce my co-host, Jennifer L. Anderson.
That's me.
And you know me, I'm Greg Washansky. And this man needs no introduction. We're going to give him one anyway. The co-creator of Gargoyles, as well as the producer of the first 2 seasons and the writer of the SLG comic books, Gargoyles and Gargoyles Bad Guys, Mr. Greg Weisman.
Hello.
The crowd goes wild.
And I would like to begin this podcast by dedicating it to the memory of Ed Asner. We are a peek behind the curtain. We are recording on August 30th. It's not going to be up until a couple months after that, depending. But I thought I should give you the date because yesterday we lost a legend. We lost an icon.
Yeah, I'm not going to tear up. I'm not. Just not going to have it.
And I'm trying not to either. I did that last night. But yeah, no, we lost Ed Asner, the voice of Hudson, as well as Burbank and Jack Dane on Gargoyles. And that doesn't even scratch the surface of his resume. He has just done so much. I mean, Lou Grant from the Mary Tyler Moore Show. He was on 3 Spider-Man cartoons. Uncle Ben on Spectacular Spider-Man. He was a recurring cop character on the MTV show, and he was J. Jonah Jameson on the 90s show. Well, look at that. He was 2 father figures to Peter Parker, 2 very different father figures, and he played them both brilliantly. Kent Nelson on Young Justice, and I feel like...
the lead character?
He also did this.
Yes.
He also did this small character called Lou Grant. You may have heard of him.
Oh my God, I love Lou Grant.
Me
I love
too.
the Mary Tyler Moore Show.
There's a lot of Mary Tyler Moore on Nick at Night. Oh, God.
Oh my God, Nick at Night.
No, he was fantastic. He was fantastic. And as I may have mentioned earlier, Greg wrote a beautiful, heartbreaking tribute to Ed on Ask Greg last night. You can read it at AskGregWeisman.com. But, Greg, do you have any further thoughts you would like to share?
It's pretty raw for me. It took me a long time to compose what I wrote last night, because this is this is pretty tough for me. This really is. I'm grateful because my dad was ill, and he seems to have come out of it doing pretty well. And I heard that and feeling pretty good, and then got the news about Ed, and it's like whiplash. I can't quite get my head around it. I send my, and I mean, that's, and I know Ed pretty well, but not nearly as well as so many people out there. I sent my condolences to his son, Matt, who I know a little bit, and all sorts of people were sending me condolences, which is very sweet, but I feel like I don't deserve that. But it's hard. This really is a tough one for me. He meant a lot to me as a professional, yeah, but as a person, he was just this great positive influence in my life, and I'm struggling, honestly. That's the best I can give you right now, I think.
I never had the pleasure of meeting him. I wish that I had. I do remember signing at least one get well card for him at one of the gathering of the Gargoyles conventions.
I every time we almost would get him at a convention, he would have a health issue, and like one of my coordinators for the convention the other day were like, it was probably best that we stopped inviting him. We felt like it was that we were causing it after a while. Like it was just like one after the other, and it was like no, we need to stop this. But like I felt like he was just going to be there forever. Like it was like it just took me out at the knees, kind of thing.
I did too. Yeah, and I remember, it was yesterday, I would hope I remember the exact moment I found out. I was on the phone with a longtime member of the fandom and a longtime friend, William Anson. People in the fandom might remember him as Revel. You two remember him, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. I love Revel.
He's a really good guy. We're going to be getting together.
He really is. He's definitely one of the good ones. We're
going to be getting together for the first time in over a decade. The last time I saw him, he wasn't at the final gathering, but he was. But I was driving back to New York from California, and I had stayed in his home for a few days to recuperate. So I'm looking forward to seeing him again in a month. But we're chatting on the phone. I'm sitting on my porch and I'm checking the news, and I literally shout, "Oh fuck!" while he's talking.
Yeah.
And ironically, we were actually talking about Hudson a couple minutes before that. So yeah, it hit me hard. I didn't expect it to hit me quite as hard as it did, but like you said, he was an institution. He was just always there. It kind of reminded me of when Stan Lee passed away.
That level.
I mean, it wasn't shocking, but it was still very sad, and I spent the rest of the day thinking about it, watching YouTube videos of him from various shows and movies he did, and I did the fastest turnaround for a tribute video for Voices from the Eyrie to post on the Twitter account that I could, but with various clips from the show, mostly from Long Way to Morning and The Price, which were two of his standout episodes, and God willing, we'll be able to do a deep dive into that. I had hoped to have a tribute discussion to Ed Asner, a very much alive Ed Asner, by the time we got to Long Way to Morning, but sometimes things just aren't in the cards. Before we move on to the episode, maybe now's the time to bring it up. Greg, do you remember Ed's audition?
I do. I mean, I remember it very well. I was fanboying majorly. I had written, when we developed the show, the dramatic version of the show, I had written Hudson based on Lou Grant. I mean, this was obviously before I knew Ed personally, but I just thought of Lou as the model for Hudson. And so at the end of the character description on the audition sheet, I wrote Hudson hates spunk, which, you know, for anyone who's ever seen the Mary Tyler Moore Show, in particular the pilot, there's this great, wonderful classic scene where Mary comes in for a job interview with Lou, and the scene is brilliantly written, but all so brilliantly performed by the two of them. And, of course, the key classic moment is where Lou says to Mary, "Kid, you've got spunk," and she gets all smiley and starts to talk, and he interrupts her and says, "I hate spunk," and nevertheless gives her a shot at the job. And it's a wonderful scene, and it's a wonderful moment. And I wrote that at the bottom of the sheet. I don't know, mostly for myself, I think, but you know, as sort of a little clue to whoever was auditioning, because it never occurred to me we'd get Ed Asner to audition. I mean, it never even crossed my mind. I just assumed I was way too big a star. And when I was discussing the characters, all the characters that we were auditioning with, our voice director, Jamie Thomas, and he's like, "Well, who are you thinking about to model this?" And for Hudson, I said, "Well, Ed Asner, but someone who can do that, And then, of course, Ed came in to audition. And later, he told me that when he saw that, Hudson hates spunk, his initial reaction was kind of elated, because he's like, "Oh, well, this one was written for me. I'm guaranteed to land this role." And then, like a minute later, he's like, "Oh, but Christ, if I don't land this role, it's just going to be horrible." So, of course, he was fantastic instantaneously in the role. He got the character. The dialogue was some combination of lifts from Michael Reaves' script with a slight rewrite by me to make it more general for the character as opposed to specific to the pilot story by itself. And he got the language, he got the character immediately, and we were like, "Okay, great. Now can you do it with a Scottish accent?"
And he could.
For him, yeah, I think for him that was a bit of a bane of his existence on the show, was having to do that. But of course he could, and he was just marvelous as the character, and so great to have in the booth. And then, as I said earlier, he just became this wonderfully important part of my life. And I don't want to overstate it. It's not like he and I hung out and went bowling and stuff like that. But we did see each other, not often, but often enough. And he was a great cheerleader for me, particularly when I had some real down times, unemployment. And there was a point when I thought I'd have to just give up on being a writer. And it was tremendously encouraging. And then, it's all mixed up in my head because he has certain commonalities with my father. They're two very different men in a lot of ways, but they're both these Ashkenazi Jews from the Midwest, and they both have these sort of gruff exteriors that are all mushy inside. And which Lou Grant had too, but Ed is like that as well. And my dad's like that. And they literally had mannerisms in common. And so, you know, I my feelings for Ed are incredibly complicated. But I just loved him dearly. And I can't quite get my head around him being gone.
Still feels that way for us, and I never even met him. Jen, did you ever have the pleasure?
I met him once, but he would never pick me out in a lineup, I'm sure. I had no connection to him. But he was one of the good ones.
Genuinely.
Yeah.
Well, Ed, wherever you are, I hope you and Freakazoid are having a good time watching that bear drive around in the little car.
Catch me, Cosgrove! Catch me!
I had to throw in one Cosgrove. We didn't mention him before. I had to throw one in. All right. Now it's time to discuss the pilot of the series, Awakening Part 1. Before we jump back over to you, Greg. Jen, do you remember your first time seeing this, watching this?
Yeah, I had kids. God, they were 5 years old. So like the Disney afternoon was like a huge thing in our house.
Nice.
And of course I've always been an animation nerd anyway, so you know, it's like, oh hey, the kids shows are on, but I would plant myself there as well. But I remember when it first came on, I'm like, this looks so cool. And the first, like, I think the moment, that Hakon and Goliath moment with the sword and, you know, and everything when he first comes out of the stone was like it for me. I was sold 110% right there.
Awesome. Awesome.
It was a beautiful moment. It was so well animated. And like I never missed an episode after that.
Awesome. Yeah, I have a slightly similar story. I had seen the commercials. I was waiting for it to come on, and I actually ended up almost missing the pilot, as I recall. But at the time, I think the Disney afternoon lineup, it was Darkwing Duck reruns, then it was Goof Troop, then Bonkers, and Gargoyles was airing in Bonkers slot that week, and I forget what came on. Oh yeah, it was Aladdin that was on after it, and at that time I had become a little bit less jazzed by the Disney afternoon. I was still watching the Darkwing Duck reruns because I loved that show, but the rest did it for me just a little bit less. So I remember I watched Darkwing Duck rerun, then I switched to another channel, I think, to watch I think it would have been a Batman the Animated Series rerun, and I'd almost forgotten to change it back. I went upstairs, and then I heard my brother call from downstairs, hey, Gargoyles is on. So I ran back downstairs just in time for the opening lettering, so I didn't miss a second of it, thank God. And I watched the whole thing, and it was like, what is this? And I was intrigued. I got more and more intrigued. At the same time, I was also a huge fan of longtime comic book reader, so Batman, X-Men were my gel, and as a longtime Spider-Man fan, I expected the 90s Spider-Man series to be my favorite thing that was going to be on at the time, and then this took me by surprise. It just blindsided me. It wasn't based on a pre-existing property. I had no preconceptions going into it, and even after the first episode, I don't think I still had the slightest idea just what this series was going to do for me or end up meaning for me. I mean, it was, but I knew it was something different. I knew it was something special, and I just wanted to see more.
Yeah, it was a super extra bonus that my kids loved it too. So
excellent.
Yeah, and we were enjoying it for different reasons. So. But I love that you can do that. Like it's definitely something that's got a little bit of something for everyone.
It does.
That was the goal.
Nailed it.
To write the show produce the show on levels that would make it one kind of show for younger kids, full of eye candy, explosions, monsters, colorful characters, big villains, etc., and at the same time have it play on another level of more sophistication for a tween audience, a teen audience, adult audience. And in essence, what we set out to do more than anything else was write the kind of show we wanted to see. And the sort of guiding goal for me in shows that I've been the showrunner on is that I've got to work towards what I'm passionate about, because then hopefully the passion comes out in the show. And hopefully there are enough people out there who will also be passionate about it that it'll be successful. But I figure if I'm not passionate about it, if I don't give a damn, then there's no way viewers are going to give a damn. So you got to start with coming to it as something you'd want to watch. And that's what Michael and Frank and I and the many other people who worked on the show were really setting out to do.
And you succeeded with flying colors. One of the things I thought was interesting about this first episode right off the bat was the cold open. I remember I talked about how mysterious the commercials were last time, barely giving us a shot of the gargoyles, and then there was no introduction, there was no theme song.
Just
it was
bam, it opened up, yeah.
So we were slowly guided in, and we don't actually see the gargoyles for the first time until Hakon does.
It's true.
Yeah, I mean, there were a couple reasons behind that. I mean, first and foremost, we were about to do an episode and a half set in the Dark Ages. But we very much wanted the audience to know that this was not set there and that it was set in the present. So, we have this teaser, introduces Elisa, and it really sort of, nails down the contemporary setting of the piece. You got cars, you got fire hydrants, you've got skyscrapers,
yeah.
And you've got danger. And then you've got this mysterious set of claw marks on a piece of masonry that falls out of the sky. And given all that, we then feel comfortable, okay, now the audience knows this is where the show's going to be set. Now let's give them the backstory. And we, she asks the question, what could be strong enough to leave claw marks in solid stone? And now we're going to answer that question. And the main, we don't run the main title until the end of the episode, which is kind of odd, but it worked. Anything that we had run, if we'd run it at the beginning, it would have given away all sorts of surprises. So we opened the episode with just the episode's title, Awakening. She asked that question, what could leave these claw marks? And the answer is gargoyles, which comes up in flaming type. And then we are in the year 994. And we've got Vikings attacking a Scottish coastal castle. And yeah, it's another couple minutes before we even look up and see the stone gargoyles on the parapets. And then another couple minutes beyond that before Goliath and the others wake up. And, the business that's used to be called the Steve Canyon intro, where in the original Steve Canyon comic strip, all these people are talking about Steve Canyon before you meet him. And then finally, you get introduced to Steve in person. And that's kind of what we did. We sort of, everyone's talking about what could leave these claw marks and talking about gargoyles. And then finally, and dramatically you see them come to life.
And perfectly, the angles, the fact that we're with Hakon, we're in Hakon's head as it happens, and he's not your traditional perspective character for a moment like this, especially when we're meeting the heroes.
You know what? Another thing that like caught my attention was that the Vikings weren't cartoony horns on their helmets Vikings. Like, they actually had the round shields and the tunics and stuff like actual Vikings did. And I really like, I remember at the time watching it, like, nodding my head like, all right, let's go.
Mm-hmm.
Good job.
I'm not sure I knew back then what a real Viking looked like as opposed to a cartoon.
Well, your character designers did.
To give credit to obviously Frank's supervision, but our partners at Walt Disney Television Animation Japan, who storyboarded this episode, directed it, and did the character designs, and obviously did their research. So, Mr. Takeuchi designed the characters, and Kazuo Terada and Saburo Hashimoto directed the episode, and Mr. Terada also boarded the episode, pretty much the entire thing, almost single-handedly, the first episode anyway. And so, I mean, really big shout-out to them and what used to be Walt Disney's Japanese studio, because they just did a phenomenal job. And, of course, Frank, we talked about this last time, Frank went over to Japan for something like a month and worked with them. And they sent the boards to us. And once it was done, and Frank and I gave notes, and we just wound up with something that was that turned out really well. But I'll tell you, it was a scary process. I mean, we get the footage back, and we weren't sure what we had. Like, we weren't sure if it was going to work. I remember seeing, for example, the scene where the captain is walking up the stairs toward the princess during the second Viking attack. And just thinking, oh my God, this is taking so long. She says fine, and there's this long gap before he responds. I'm like, this isn't going to work. Of course, it worked because of music. I was such an amateur as a producer that, it was exactly right. And I remember our editor, our first season editor, Ellen Orson, and back then we were editing on moviolas. I mean, what was interesting to me, again, as part of the learning process, is this show is so old that when we did the first season of Gargoyles, it was all edited on with film on old-fashioned editing machines, moviolas. And by the second season, we'd switched over to computerized editing on an Avid. And of course, since the second season of Gargoyles, I've never even laid eyes on a moviola. I mean, that's not actually true, but I mean, I've never worked on one since then, in editing. It's all been computer editing on Avid or Premiere or one program or another, one machine or another. But that transition literally was happening during the first two seasons of Gargoyles. And Ellen was like, no, this is what you want. You want this moment of tension here, the musical filler, don't worry. And I'm like, really? She's like, yeah. And again, I was so green back then. But I did have a sense of what I was looking to achieve. And Frank and I basically had the same vision for it. But to me, it's still something of a miracle that it worked. It just wasn't the kind of show we'd done at Disney. And it wasn't even the kind of show that Frank had done at Warner Brothers. I mean, it had more in common with Batman, certainly, than with Darkwing Duck. But but it was still a very different animal. And so it was really new ground for both of us. And with some amount of squabbling, we helped each other through it it's a pretty kick-ass first episode. I mean, there are things in it that I find really interesting. Like, there are 2 act breaks, right? End of Act 1, cliffhanger, is the gargoyles, is the threat. Got Princess Catherine sort of bad-mouthing them, and then you see the gargoyles in the doorway, and Goliath growls lowly, and that's what our commercial break was. In other words, it was so early in the show that we actually thought, and it works, I think, that you don't know the gargoyles well enough. You don't know what they will or won't do. And so we're able to cut to commercial because we're worried that the gargoyles are going to kill everybody in the dining room. And likewise, at the end of the second act, what's the threat? Is it the Vikings that are the threat? No, it's the gargoyles. Mary's thrown a stick at Brooklyn. Damona's leaped down. And Brooklyn and Lexington are like, okay, if they think we're monsters, we'll show them monsters. And you go to commercial like, oh my God, the gargoyle's going to attack. And of course isn't what happens. In either case, the gargoyles aren't the threat; they're the heroes. But in that moment, those early days of the show, we actually felt that the gargoyles were mysterious enough and different enough and threatening enough and frightening enough that we could actually use them as the villainous outs for 2 act breaks.
Nice.
Nice indeed. That really worked. I mean, it's not one of those things I really thought about until it was pointed out, but you did that. And
don't really notice it as much now because most of us are watching it these days. You watch it on DVD. You watch it on Disney Plus.
There's no that commercial break, that moment of suspense and then break we don't have.
Yeah.
Yeah. You still got, they haven't re-edited the show, so it still goes to black and then comes back. But it's not the same effect as having commercials. Just like most people, I fast forward through most commercials, but at the same time, there's a value to me in having commercial breaks that I think we've lost. That moment, even if all you're going to do is fast forward, to just sort of take in what just happened and go, oh my God, and then you're pressing fast forward to race to the, to the next bit.
Find out what happens.
But now you're just watching. There's no time to let it sink in at all, at all, none. And I think that's something I'm nostalgic for as a creator, is having that moment for the audience to go, holy shit.
Yeah.
On a personal note, and this is a larger thing, but I've recently begun to be grateful that entire seasons of shows, like say Young Justice, don't drop all at once anymore. I like being able to sit on an episode or 2 for a week and just absorb it, speculate, think about it, and I think Netflix kind of did away with that for a while.
Yeah, they would just dump the whole thing, but especially. I miss the discussion between the episodes.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we would sit down and watch a show and then, talk about it at work for a week before the next episode came on, and for a while there we lost all of that. And now when they do that, like, the fans riot, and I'm like, no, sit down. We're good. This is good. We don't have to info dump everything.
I'm somewhat famous for liking to torture the fans. So my attitude is, I don't want to have, God knows I learned this lesson, huge hiatuses between episodes, because that's painful, and I get that, and people fall out of the habit. But once a week seems right to me. It just, that gives you time for water cooler talk. That gives people time to think about all right, well, what's going to happen next, and make their guesses, and some will be right, and some will be wrong. But when you just binge through without stopping, I think it loses something. I think it's, then you might as well just watch a movie. I mean, if you're going to watch the whole thing in one sit down, that's not, to me, the nature of serialized television. And of course, Gargoyles was never fully serialized. It was what we called episodic but sequential. Each episode stood alone. We didn't tend to end on cliffhangers unless we did a two-parter or a three-parter or something like that. Or like this, that we're just started on a five-parter. But obviously you wanted to watch those episodes in order. You got more out of it by watching it in order. If you came in the middle, that's fine. But then hopefully you get intrigued enough that you want to keep watching, and then you want to go back and see the ones you missed. So there's an element of each episode being a self-contained story that any person could come in on and enjoy. But then you get more out of it by watching it in order. On the other hand, I also think you get more out of it by taking a beat in between each episode.
Yeah.
Agreed. I love the entire sequence in the dining hall. Princess Catherine is outraged about beasts in the dining hall while she's got dogs in there eating.
Yeah, there was supposed to be this moment that we never quite got from Japan, and ultimately Frank was like, it's okay, we don't need it. We've already established that the dogs are there. But there's supposed to be this moment where she says, it's allowed beasts in the dining hall, and immediately you see a dog sort of jump up on, put two legs on the table and grab a piece of meat and run away. And have her with a look of chagrin or embarrassment, because obviously she's just being hypocritical. It's not really about beasts in the dining hall. She's just afraid of these creatures. And, a few episodes down the road, we'll find out why. But that's what it's really about. And I wanted that juxtaposition of putting the dog right there after she said the line. But we never got it. And it still works. I mean, like you said, you noticed the dogs earlier at the opening of the sequence, but it's one of the little things that I wish we had been able to get, which is putting that moment right there. Would have been great.
Right in her face.
And
yeah.
And then the following sequence where Goliath is speaking with the captain and with Demona, and it's just, I mean, you get a sense of who Goliath is practically right there, whereas I feel like Demona is in a way hiding who she really is to a point, and she briefly lets it out when she's understandably frustrated. She's right that they deserve better, but the moment she says they should bow to us, I'm thinking, whoa, that goes beyond wanting to be treated with respect. She was a bit of a supremacist even then.
The way I saw that was, okay, we just saw Catherine be
Goliath bow, yeah.
No, Catherine be like nasty about how she feels she's superior to these beasts.
Mm-hmm.
And then we turn it around and find out the gargoyles can be the same way.
Yep.
That Demona is being the same way that Catherine was being. And I thought it was a nice bookend, a little mirror there to remind us that they are, not just a caricature, that they each have their own kind of, they're practically human.
And then it also gives us the opportunity for Goliath to sort of state his mantra. We are what we are. What they think won't change that. It's the nature of humankind to fear what they do not understand. Their ways are not our ways. And we wanted to, Michael and I constantly wanted to sort of remind the audience, these aren't just humans with wings, and and a tail. That they have their own culture, their own history, their own biology, and Goliath is the signpost for that. Everyone else will adapt, and Goliath will too, as we'll see as the series progresses. But ultimately, Goliath is the voice of the gargoyle way. So by having Demona be that counterpoint to Catherine, just as you said, Jen, it gives Goliath the opportunity to sort of make the mission statement clear, the gargoyle mission statement clear.
And he puts her at ease there, or he thinks he does, but we'll get to that much later. And
there's no at ease with her.
Nope. We'll have plenty of time throughout this and future podcasts to discuss that. But I mean,
I love her so much.
Me too. But and I agree with what you're saying, Greg. Goliath was in a lot of ways ahead of his time, and I like the idea that he comes to, at the time, modern day 1990s Manhattan, and then he has to adapt. I mean, he was ahead of his time, and then he's suddenly behind, and he has to get caught up.
So he started out being very progressive, and now he's like, whoa, wait, now I'm playing catch up. Yeah.
Tom is
interesting. We'll see that more in the next couple episodes.
Yeah, Tom is a little bit interesting. I have a feeling every time I watch this, I think on most shows somehow he or someone like him in modern times would be the kid's sidekick, because it feels like every show of the show has to have a kid's sidekick. Like the executives think that the kids need a surrogate character, to the point where I almost don't remember when the last time I saw an action cartoon with an entire adult cast was.
That goes all the way back to Batman and Robin, and we weren't entirely free from it either. I mean, there's a version of Gargoyles comedy development where the Elisa character is a mom, and she's got two kids, a sister and a brother, who become the Gargoyles' human friends, and we ditched that ultimately, and then when we redeveloped the show as a action drama, that totally fell by the wayside. But the idea of having a point of view character for younger kids in the audience, I think has a real value to it. I mean, I always thought people used to describe Batman and Robin to me like, oh, Robin's there for the kids to identify with, and I'm like, no, sorry, the kids don't want to be Robin. The kids want to be Batman.
Yep.
Teenagers might look at a teenage Robin and go, yeah, that's me. But the little kids, no, they want to be Batman. But why is Robin there? And the answer is to humanize Batman, to give him someone to play off of, to show that he's more than just a Dark Avenger. And likewise, Tom is there to sort of, not because the kids need a little blonde kid to identify with, but because they need to get answers about the gargoyles. They need to see how the gargoyles relate to humans and to each other. And so that's Tom's great function in this early going is, he's open enough to go up to the gargoyles, even though his mom and most of the other peasants in the courtyard are terrified of them. But he sees them as heroes already. And so even a young kid in the audience will go, oh, well, then I guess I can see them as heroes. And then through Tom, we learn about, hey, they don't have names. Isn't that weird? How do you tell each other apart? Well, we look different. Like, that seems like a dumb question.
Duh, we don't look the same.
And he's like, yeah, but what do you call each other? And Brooklyn's like, friend. Like, it's like from Brooklyn's point of view and Lexington's point of view, these questions are so odd. But they're the questions that a kid would ask. And so Tom is there, again, not for the kids to identify with, but as a to answer the questions that our younger audience would have. And then, of course, the adult audience thinks, well, I don't need that. But in fact, they need it more than the kids do, because kids are very accepting. Adults need things explained for them. So I love Tom as a character, but the fact of the matter is that he also serves a real significant and important function. And he doesn't have a lot of screen time, and yet somehow he manages in that very little screen time to give us what we need to know, and generate a conflict that will ultimately save the lives of the three young gargoyles and the beast.
I love that moment. It's so full of irony. Goliath is just diffusing the situation, and I think he understands what happened there, but he just needs to diffuse it quickly. And I like that he even says to Demona that he'll make it up to them later. Like, this is not a serious punishment. I just need to resolve this for the time being.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the thing I really love about that moment is that Demona doesn't call Goliath out while the young gargoyles are in front of them. At this stage, she's second in command, and she respects what her boss and / boyfriend is authority. Of course, once they're gone, then she does confront him, which I think is right. You've got to question authority, but she doesn't undercut his authority. In that period of her life, she's not per se looking to replace him. She's not trying to undercut him. She wants to support him, but at the same time mold him into the kind of leader she wants him to be. And so I love that moment where she waits until they're gone before she calls him on his bullshit.
And Bronx did not deserve that. I mean, I'm glad he had to go to the Rookery too, because then he's alive later. But man, he got the short end of the stick.
Broadway didn't either. I mean, Broadway had nothing.
He was just enjoying himself, having a snack.
True.
Right.
Hashtag free Bronx.
Yeah, one thing that's also sort of fun for me watching this in hindsight is sort of the evolution of Broadway. In this first episode, he seems to just be a guy who eats. There's nothing more to him, almost. He's got a little bit of a Falstaffian quality to him when we first meet him. All of nature trembles at my passing. But then, he goes down during the fight and he's just eating. And then, Viking comes by, so he hits him over the head with a drumstick. And then, later he's just eating, and when he thinks the Vikings are attacking again, he's just hoarding food. And then he goes down to the Rookery and he's eating the moss off the wall, and so he comes off as a cliche initially, I think. And I'm okay with that because we knew where we were going with it. We knew that, all right, let's give you an easy handle for these three young gargoyles. We'll get you to something more rich as this series progresses, at least once we're through the pilot.
That was literally going to be one of my talking points here, how the trio start out as kind of stereotypical Broadway with the eating jokes in contrast to what they fully develop into. I will admit, though, on this rewatch, when he was eating the moss off of the wall with all the eggs there, I couldn't help but say, Broadway, don't do that in front of your future mate.
God. I don't think she noticed.
No, I don't think so either, but... So circling back to Princess Catherine, and even the Vikings for that matter, I was looking at the early documentation for the show, the notes you were sending out to Michael Reaves, and before Michael Reaves, Eric Luke, and a previously undisclosed writer as well. And in some of these earlier drafts, the Vikings weren't Vikings, they were marauders. And Princess Catherine wasn't princess, she was a queen. And granted, we know that there were Vikings attacking Scotland at the time, and there was...
I didn't know that.
We've established
later, but I didn't.
he doesn't know anything about Vikings.
I mean, at the time, I think that Michael, as I recall, so God knows my memory is atrocious, switched it from generic Marauders to Vikings. And I was like, oh, cool, Vikings, that's cool. But it wasn't like I sat there and said, oh, good, that's historically accurate. It's only later that I found out it was historically accurate. And I honestly don't remember that Michael said to me, oh, yeah, that's right, that's historically accurate. I don't know if he knew. He may have. I don't know. But what I know is that later when we found out it was historically accurate, we were like, well, okay, we by accident, and maybe it wasn't an accident. Maybe Michael was on top of this. But from my point of view, it was like by accident we happened to have been historically accurate within the framework of a TV show about gargoyles. So let's continue with that. You know, in other words, when we got to, and we'll talk about this more, I assume, way down the road, but when we got to shows like City of Stone or Avalon, and we started going into more depth on the Scottish history, the rule was that we could add to history. You know, in other words, here are stories from history that you don't know about, but we couldn't contradict history. And, you know, there were things where some of the dating of this time in Scotland is loose, like, oh, this guy had to have been born sometime between here and here. We don't know exactly when, or had to die sometime between here and here. And that gave us some more flexibility. But we really made an effort in the episodes that followed Awakening to be on track with history. But the truth is, when we made Awakening, I did no research at all. And again, maybe Michael did, but if he did, he didn't tell me that he did. So it felt to me later like it was just, wow, we got lucky. And so here, I mean, I think changing her from a queen to a princess, I don't remember why we did that. But again, it made it easier to sort of slot her into history. So it wound up being a really good choice, and it fit what we did down the road. But I don't know how much of that was sort of like forethought and how much of it was dumb luck. There's very little forethought on my part when it comes to that aspect of it.
And why Scotland? Why did you choose Scotland?
That was sort of a logic game for us early on. We wanted, I mean, I knew enough to know that, you know, no one was speaking modern English in 1,000 years ago. But we didn't want to obviously deal with having our actors speak in ancient Celtic or subtitling or anything like that. So we just wanted a certain suspension of disbelief in there. And so setting it in an English-speaking country that is a modern-day English-speaking country made that go down easier than doing the same thing, say, in France or Germany or something like that. So we chose, you know, with that in mind, we were basically talking about the British Isles. And then from the standpoint of, say, England versus Scotland, we just felt like, and again, I don't know how accurate this is, but we felt at the time that the connotation of the English was more sophisticated, if not prissy. And we wanted a rougher hinterlands feel to the medieval scenes. So we went with Scotland because we felt it was further north, further away from, you know, the center of London civilization and less historically known, and thus easier for us to for the audience, that is, to buy into the fact that, yeah, maybe this happened and certain things just weren't recorded into history. And, those stereotypes that I just listed are horrible. But that's what went through our heads, is that we would have a rougher flavor to it by setting it on the west coast of Scotland as opposed to, London. And we wanted great contrast between the modern stuff in metropolitan New York. We didn't want them, the gargoyles, even by medieval standards, in a metropolitan area. We didn't want them in London. We wanted them out in the boonies, They're not even in Edinburgh. They're way out in Wyvern on the west coast.
Why did you choose 1,000 years?
Nice round number.
All right.
I mean,
Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Okay.
I mean, we didn't want 100 years. That obviously didn't make any sense. We wanted this to be, going all the way back to our Gummy Bears inspiration, which we talked about before. We wanted medieval, and it was 1990. I mean, it wasn't 1994 when we were making the show, but it was 1994 when the show was going to premiere. So we thought, all right, let's do this in 994. Nice round 1,000-year number. It slept for 1,000 years. That's how we pitched it, and it just made sense to stick with that.
Cool.
Very cool, very cool. And you mentioned Michael Reaves a few times, the writer of this episode. I feel it would be remiss if we didn't mention what a brilliant writer he is. He's been writing things that since my childhood, that I've been watching, seeing his name written by all over the place, and he is someone that I would love to get on here and speak with, but last I heard on a blog post that he wrote in 2014 about his health, I'm not entirely sure that's possible.
Yeah, the last time we saw him, podcasting probably isn't the best choice.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what his situation is now. I haven't talked to him in years, which is on me probably. But yeah, I mean, last time we saw him at a convention, his daughter was basically translating for him. He couldn't really speak, but his mind was still sharp. I don't know what his situation is now. Because that was, 2009 or something, Shepard?
Yes, it was.
Yeah, it was.
So I don't really know what the situation is now. Michael was, without a doubt, a savior for us on Gargoyles. This was before anyone trusted me to write anything. I had no track record, and my bosses thought I was a decent executive, and were willing to let me produce, but they weren't about to let me write. And we went through a number of different writers, television writers, comic book writers, people who've done both, and they just couldn't grasp what we were trying to do with the show. And Michael came in and he got it. And he didn't just get it, he executed it. He took a story that basically Paul Lacey and I had come up with and had tried to get through completed a screenplay, teleplay. And they just weren't getting it. And Michael came in and he looked at what Eric had done and the notes that Paul and I had on what Eric had done, and he brought it together and he made it work. And we gave both Eric and Michael story credit on it, which Michael clearly deserved and Eric contractually had earned. So the truth of the matter is that the basic story idea was Paul and me. But we were executives, and in those days at least, for good reason, I think, executives weren't allowed to take credit. It was considered part of their jobs, but we had really broken that story down. But Michael is the one who made it work. I mean, we had broken the story down for two different writers before Michael, and they had not been able to make it work. And Michael was the one who absolutely saved our asses on the show, because we'd gone through so many writers that people were starting to wonder if is this doable for Disney, and Michael proved that it was, and did an excellent job. It was just terrific.
He did, and sometimes I feel, not you, but sometimes I feel we as a fandom don't give him enough credit.
I would agree with that. Like, but fandom focuses on the shiny. Like, if you mention Gargoyles, they're like, oh, the one with the Star Trek characters on it. You get that a lot. Behind the scenes is what really makes it work.
Yeah, we'll talk about that down the line. But I'm glad we were able to discuss Michael and his contributions. I'm sure we'll talk about that even more down the line. And speaking of other contributions, we went into this a little bit, but the animation is just stunning. I'm thinking about sequences like the fire around Broadway. Damona's hair moves in this episode in ways that it doesn't in any other episode. Even other episodes Walt Disney Japan did. They went all out on this one. Not that they didn't go all out on the rest, but there's all sorts of little details I'm spotting here and there when I rewatch this one, and it is a stunning episode to look at.
I think...
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, you!
I think that Walt Disney Japan had something to prove. I mean, this was the first show where, as opposed to just all the pre-production being done in Burbank or North Hollywood, just animating it, we were letting them do the pre-production. They wanted to show that they were up for that, and they could do it, and they could handle it, and that they could do a kick-ass job, and so they did. This was a talented group of people at Walt Disney Animation Japan in Tokyo, and with a huge skill set, and they just knocked it out of the park. If you go across the 5-part pilot, some of the animation's better than others, but they made sure that first episode really kicked some ass. And they did great. I mean, and the proof is right there on the screen. We called retakes. Frank and I called retakes, but, if you want to get nitpicky, I'm sure there are little errors still in the show, but for all intents and purposes, they just really, hit a home run with it.
It really had like that anime quality to it that I loved in anime so much. And that's what the hair reminded me of. It was like, it moves like anime hair, and it was just gorgeous. It was just, so beautifully done.
I mean, you can really see that anime influence in the teaser it's set in Manhattan. That to me feels very anime.
Yeah.
And, we did all the script work in LA, but everything that followed, under Frank and my supervision, but everything that followed, was all done in Japan. And it's just gorgeous, but you can see the anime influence in it. I mean, I don't think it in general looks like an anime show. There are commonalities, but I don't think we look like anime. The girls don't have the giant eye. The character design is not an anime character design, and yet you can see the anime influence. And I think especially in that opening sequence in New York, you can really see
a lot of the special effects and the movement and the action and stuff definitely had that feel.
Yeah, I agree.
Very cool.
Yeah, Jenny, I have way more of an eye for that sort of thing than I do. I just know, ooh, it looks pretty.
It's pretty. Yeah, I was hooked on anime long before Gargoyles came out, so.
Nice.
So I definitely felt it.
Nice. And there are a lot of little details in the show across the pilot. I mean, there's that scene at the beginning of the second night, and you can hear the crickets chirping while Goliath has his scene with Demona and the captain on top of his tower. It's a little detail you guys didn't need to do, and I'm glad you did.
Awesome sound design.
Well, I mean, we had a great team at our audio house, which was Advantage Audio, and Thomas was our sound effects designer, and he just did great work for us on the show. And he thought about all those little details, and then just from a sound standpoint, obviously, you got to mention Carl Johnson and the great score that he created. And in those days, it's changed. We used to do full orchestras, but because of that, we couldn't afford to do 22 full minutes of music. Because orchestras are expensive for obvious reasons. Nowadays, we score an episode from beginning to end, but we're not using an orchestra. A lot of it is, mimicked electronic.
Digital, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But in those days, and I went to a couple of those sessions with Carl conducting, it's a full orchestra, so what we had to do was sit down and spot the episodes and go, okay, we can't afford to do the whole episode. Although I think we did nearly all of the first episode because, we had to create a music library for Gargoyles. But it's like, okay, let's do this scene. Let's do this scene. This scene, I think we can reuse stuff from previous scenes. So we had a phenomenal music editor named Mark Perlman who, would use Carl's library of score to score, a number of different episodes that followed. And that's a challenge too. It's like you've got, X amount of cues and here's a new episode and we can afford to score one new scene. Otherwise Mark's going to have to just use the cues from previous episodes to score the thing as if that score was written for this new episode. And of course, again, first episode, that's not an issue. You've got no library, so you got to score, if not the whole thing, virtually the whole thing. But it's still, the theme song to Gargoyles, the opening title theme, and all the rest of the music is just so gorgeous and so evocative and so iconic, and that's all Carl Johnson.
And he was like, if you watched animation in the 90s, he worked on everything. It was just amazing.
I saw his name in the credits for Animaniacs back in the day.
yeah. I mean, he did Batman and Mighty Ducks and all that stuff. So
he did so much, and I mean, the guy is just a genius. I was glad we were able to finally get him to a convention before we stopped doing
before
conventions.
They stopped having him.
And I know, and he was such a great guest, interesting to talk to. And I don't speak the language of music at all. I just know what I like, and this music was beautiful. I mean, I still have the soundtrack, at least the tracks that he released at the 2001 gathering, and occasionally I pop them in, and they're still soothing. They still thrill me to this day. Hopefully one day we can get him on here.
Dream big.
Yeah. And I will admit also, one of my first clues when I first watched this way back in 1994 that the show was different was when we found out who the surprise villain of the episode was. And it was a very well-meaning antagonist. And while we had seen well-meaning antagonists before, you've never seen a well-meaning antagonist that I ever can recall in animation up to that point who was the friend of our heroes and was genuinely trying to help them out.
Oh, the captain, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And the surprise when it was revealed.
Yeah, I mean, Ed Gilbert, who played the late Ed Gilbert, both our Eds are gone now, Asner and Gilbert, but the late Ed Gilbert, I'd worked worked with briefly on Tailspin. He played Baloo, and he was so great. And when it came time to do the scene where the disguised captain approaches Hakon and offers, in essence, his services, it's like, okay, we don't want this to be revealed as a captain. So it's one line of dialogue, but it can't sound like the captain. We want everyone to think it's the Magus. And I know people to this day have said to me, oh, yeah, you had Jeff Bennett, who played the Magus, do that one line. That was they're like, you're sort of cheated. And I'm like,
we sort of did.
Yeah, that's Ed Gilbert doing Jeff Bennett doing the Magus.
It was fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
I think we did sort of cheat, but not in the way they're thinking. I mean, we cheated in that. Why is the captain using the Magus's voice? I mean, what to Hakon? Why the hell is he doing that? That's a legit question, I think.
But then it makes that moment in the stairwell when you find out, when he confronts Catherine, like that much more shocking.
It does. Also, the captain's wearing a white robe with a hood. He's down there. Maybe he doesn't like the guy. Maybe he's just riffing on him on purpose to amuse himself.
Or he's framing him. If they get caught, he's framing him for it. If things go south, he can say, "I wasn't me."
I don't know. I saw some guy in a white robe leaving earlier today.
Yeah.
But no, Ed Gilbert did a fantastic job, and I'm glad he mentioned him. He was a terrific voice actor, and he was terrific as Baloo. He's terrific in everything I used to hear him in, and he's missed also. And I just liked how well-meaning he was. We'll probably talk more about that next time, but
it's a show about people whose best intentions go sideways hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, we were trying to create fully realized characters who are, whether gargoyle or human, they're human and they make mistakes. It's not always going to go well. And the captain was part of that. What you hope is that once it's revealed and you get his motivation, you understand how it went from bad to worse, but it still comes down to him, being frustrated with the situation as it existed and thinking he can change it for the better and then making it considerably worse.
It was tragic as is, and it got even more tragic when, okay, listeners, if you don't know about this, there's a website called AskGregWeisman.com, and on there, back in the early days, he posted a prose story called Once Upon a Time There Were Three Brothers. He revealed the captain's real name, and we know that his relationship with these gargoyles goes back a long way before even the castle, according to that story.
Mm-hmm.
So that just took a tragic situation and made it even more tragic. And
yeah, more pain.
Mm-hmm. And it's not information you needed for the show, obviously, because we got it, but you added to that even years after the show ended. I mean, well done.
Thanks. A lot of credit to pass around. It's not just me, obviously, but yeah, we worked hard to make all this play and, fool the audience briefly. There's the scene of the Magus, looking through a spell book. I always thought he legitimately was frightened of the gargoyles and that he's looking up the stone sleep spell that later he uses, and he's bookmarking it, which is why when Hakon opens the book and starts ripping off pages,
goes right to the spell.
It's not an accident that he's ripping off the second page that deactivates the spell. He's opening the book and starting to rip pages from where it's marked. And it was marked there, and the Magus is ready with that spell because he was looking for it. He was looking for something he could use against the gargoyles because he did not trust them. Didn't understand them, didn't trust them. Humans fear what they don't understand. So that always kind of grated on me. People saying, "Oh, it's such a huge coincidence that he happens to rip off the counterspell." I'm like, guys, we actually showed you the scene where he's looking for that spell. I mean,
you play fair with the audience.
Page and translating it from the Gaelic. I'm not sure what else we could have done to spell that out any clearer, but
you play fair with the audience, and then they don't pay attention. Don't you just love that? I mean, and also one of the things that took me by surprise when this episode first aired was you didn't okay, I mean, back in the 80s, G.I. Joe, they always parachuted out of the planes. They always jumped out of the tanks and the things. No one ever really got hurt. And here we see at one point the captain literally kicks a Viking off of a tower, and that's a pretty big drop. We don't see him. Okay, we see Hakon landing in Hay later, but he needed to come back to do the thing that he does. But I mean, it is implied that there are killings going on here. I mean, they're not shown. It's implied, and one of the things that I noticed in recent viewings, which the castle had a pretty strong garrison. They needed the gargoyles' help, but we see the garrison being marched out in chains along with everyone else at the end of the episode. That garrison is not present in Awakening Part 2, and they don't escort Catherine to Edinburgh in Avalon Part 1, and all I can think is, Hakon put them to the sword on the way back to the cave.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't. It's been so long, I can't remember if we thought that out or not. But probably, you killed all the gargoyles because you're worried about them as a threat. The peasants make good slaves, and the nobility you can ransom in the medieval sense. But what the hell are you going to do with a bunch of archers who, if they get loose, could cause you trouble? It's the same with the gargoyles. If you're going to smash the gargoyles, you're not going to leave enemy soldiers alive.
Right.
So, I mean, that makes sense. I mean, I think the captain was sort of disgusted with his archers after the first night when they tried to take credit because they fired a few arrows at the fleeing Vikings. They tried to take credit for chasing the Vikings off when it was so clear that it was the gargoyles who routed the Vikings, not the Scotsmen. So I think, if he failed to save the gargoyles, he wasn't going to work too hard to save those archers and soldiers on there. I think he was pretty well disgusted with the whole group of them.
And also, they killed all the gargoyles.
Yeah, I was just about to get to that one. There's no way we were going to let that one slide.
So, jaw-dropping. The moment where you realize, oh, the captain really has no play here, and he's going to have to let him do this. And they start whacking away on him, and Hakon starts, and I was just like, whoa! It was like a huge plot point for me, that just hit me in the chest.
That scene is perfect, by the way. The way it is written, the way it is directed, the way the music comes in, knowing when not to use music, the silhouette and the use of shadows and lights. There is nothing wrong with that scene.
No, and it just ramps up that awful feeling. Clearly the captain is devastated. So you're feeling what he's feeling, and oh, you done messed up, my friend, So, instant karma.
Yeah, I mean, I'll admit I'm not entirely sure their plan was workable anyway, but we can discuss that later on. But it's still, you just feel it. I remember once I got into it with someone about this show, and they mentioned something about, the innocence of that show, that cartoon is so innocent, people shouldn't be they shouldn't be drawing fan art like this, and I said something like, this show opens with genocide.
There's a fighting show, you've got these intense relationships, but there's battles and stuff. This isn't just, I people that fluffify things.
And all the great heroes have tragic backgrounds. I mean, Peter Parker couldn't save Uncle Ben. In fact, was somewhat responsible for Uncle Ben's death. Superman's home planet Krypton blew up. Batman loses his parents. Goliath loses his clan.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I mean, it was time to, we got real.
Right.
One of the big motivations from a Disney executive standpoint for doing the show was, okay, the Disney Afternoon, which we all loved, and we loved every show on it, honestly. But there was fear that there was a sameness there. That, we really needed to start bringing in some diverse content into the thing. So Gargoyles was allowed to be Gargoyles. It helped that we had no network. We were a syndicated show. The only S&P notes we got were from, Adrian Bello, who was our S&P executive, although I don't know if she had started back that early. Maybe. I can't remember now. I mean, she was definitely there for all of season 2, and I can't remember if she was there for season 1, but we basically use common sense. I mean, we did show that the gargoyles were destroyed, and we showed the shadow on the wall of the mace coming down on a gargoyle who we didn't really know. But we didn't show it on camera. If the captain kicks a Viking off the tower, we don't show the impact on the ground. I mean, some of this is just common sense. But we imply things, and then Goliath and Hudson fly back, and there are no gargoyles. There's just rubble, and he lands on the parapet where his angel of the night is known to roost, and it's chunks.
I remember thinking that's how morbid that was.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's kind of like rummaging through someone's entrails kind of thing, because he picks it up in his hands and stuff, and I was just like, ooh, that's kind of grisly.
Yeah. I remember a lot of my initial reactions. I cannot remember, though, if I thought she was actually dead at the time. Can you, Jen?
Oh, no, I didn't think she was dead. I there was no way that cool character was not coming back.
That very cool character. I mean,
cool character. Had to come back.
I remember my first reaction to her when she first steps out of the shadows, Face Me Human, If You Dare. I remember saying, "Wow, who's that?" I had no idea that I would one day have that character tattooed on my lower leg. Art courtesy of you, by the way.
You're welcome. You're welcome. But I seriously, we wouldn't have gotten that cool, Face Me Human If You Dare if she was a one-off.
Mm-hmm.
So, in my brain, she was there. I just had to be patient.
And like I said, the scene was perfect. The only thing that I think could have improved the content at all, and you said you couldn't do it with characters we were familiar with, but it would have been cool if, say, we had gotten to meet, even briefly, Othello, Desdemona, and even Iago at that point, and...
It really would have been cool. There was a big problem with that, which was not S&P related, which was that we didn't know we were doing Cold Stone yet. These days, when I plan a show, for reasons just like that, Brandon and I, for example, Brandon Vietti and I are working on Young Justice. We plan meticulously, sometimes seasons in advance. But we were, I was, again, a tyro producer, barely knew what I was doing. Some would say didn't know what I was doing. But, and from our point of view, we thought we were planning a lot. I mean, the whole thing about the eggs down in the rookery, and so we had notions of things that we wanted to do, but we definitely hadn't come up with the idea of Cold Stone yet. And so we didn't feature Othello, Desdemona, Iago. Again, in hindsight, I would have absolutely done that. I probably would not have shown them getting smashed because, again, S&P, I don't think we would have been allowed to do that. But I would have shown them in the episode, and then, they weren't among the survivors, so that down the road we could, do Cold Stone and
shock us
not
all.
have to ask the audience to say, just trust us on that. You didn't see them, but they were there. But that's the reason. It wasn't, it's not that you don't see them because, S&P, we couldn't show them, we couldn't let you get to know characters and then kill them. The reason you don't see them is we hadn't thought of it yet. It was early days. I mean, really early days. We wrote that pilot again, across at least 3 writers, plus Paul and myself. And we had, you can see in the credits, there's all these artists listed doing development inspirational work, like Bob Klein and Greg Guler and Paul Felix and Dave Schwartz and Ted Blackman, all work that we had done before and after Frank came aboard to ship over to Japan so that they could do designs and backgrounds and stuff like that, based on, what we had sold the show on. But back when we were doing that pilot, we had, we had no idea we knew we were doing 13 episodes, but I couldn't have told you what those 8 other stories were. We had the pack already in our heads. We had an idea for the mutates, which we didn't end up doing till season 2, and a bunch of other things. But one thing we definitely did not have was Cold Stone. That came later.
And it was great. And for all the and for all you're saying about how green you were at the time, you still created what is widely recognized as one of the greatest Western animated series of all time. So, while you say you didn't know what you were doing well, you must have done something right, you and your team.
Yeah, I think we did a lot right.
You did.
I'm proud of the show. Don't get me wrong. I think I did a good job. I did my part, and I think again, Frank and Michael and Mr. Takeuchi and Mr. Terada and all these people, including our, Jamie Thomas and a phenomenal cast, and many other people did a really great job collectively. But I don't want to pretend the things that just weren't true. I could sit here and go, oh yeah, we planned it all way in advance, and it's not really true.
Yeah, there's producers and creators out there who I won't name who do that. So
there was a level that we planned that I think was more than the typical episodic show particularly of the 90s. Certainly, but we definitely planted seeds and had ideas, but that began to come into play more in the episodes that followed the 5-part pilot. At the beginning, we were just desperate to get the scripts for the pilot out and get them over to Japan and get them animated and all that stuff. It was, there wasn't a ton of forethought in those days because there just wasn't room for it, and I didn't know to do it. But it's a lesson that we all learned very quickly. And then there were other things that were happy accidents. This will come up later, but Michael writes a throwaway line about Xanatos meeting with the Emir, who never appears on screen in that episode, and it was just a line really done to indicate how important Xanatos is, that he can postpone a message with some Emir. But that always stuck with me, like, well, who is this Emir? What does he and Xanatos have to talk about? So, down the road, we start saying, okay, the Emir's going to be doing this. And let's mention him one more time before we actually get to see him so that, it feels like continuity. But that continuity game was something that, again, I come from comic books before animation, so I'm used to that. But it was definitely something that we began to build as the first season progressed, and definitely all through the second season we were big on that stuff. But in these early days that we're talking about now, not nearly as much forethought about what would be coming next. We just sort of took it for granted that we'd be able to find stories. And in fact, that was true in space. I mean, we not only never had trouble finding stories, the bigger issue was we got way more stories than we have episodes. Which ones are we going to pick? And
that's a great dilemma to have.
Yeah, it is. But so we were right in saying, hey, well, we're, taking it for granted that we'd have enough stories, but we, and that's been true from Gargoyles from day one. I've always had way more stories to tell than I've had episodes or comic book issues to tell them in. But, it doesn't necessarily mean that we had a lot of forethought in the early going.
So what led to the decision to strip it across the entire week, especially since it was a 13-episode season, and usually when you only have 13 episodes, you're going to air once a week. So what was the impetus behind that?
Well, we were a once-a-week show, generally. We were designed to be Friday afternoons. But DuckTales and Tailspin and Rescue Rangers, all those shows, including Aladdin and in those days, they did these 4-part pilots, 4 parts, and would strip them across the first week just to get the audience excited about it. It was a little weird for us because those shows were 5-day-a-week shows and we were a 1-day-a-week show. So it was going to eat up a lot of our content rapidly. But it was a game plan that pointed us at television, which was Disney's distribution arm and syndication felt comfortable with, and so they wanted to do that 4-episode pilot. As Michael and I began working on scripts as opposed to the outlines, but actually getting the scripts in, what became clear, particularly once Frank weighed in, was that this story was way too long. It wasn't going to fit in 4. And we needed, originally, and the biggest thing was the medieval section, which in theory was all supposed to be in the first episode. And if you can picture, you basically get 4 acts of medieval stuff, 3 acts in episode 1 and 1 act in episode 2. And so they were saying to us, you got to crush these 4 acts down into 3 and make it all fit into 1 episode. And I just kept looking at it, and Michael was like, well, I can do it if you want me to, but I'm like, I don't want to do it. I like what we got here. I liked what Michael had written, and I felt it was rich and worthwhile, and I just sort of looked at it, and then I looked at the broadcast pattern, and I said, someone explain to me why we're doing 4 parts and not 5. I mean, they're 5 days a week, right? Can we just take this story and make it into 5 instead of 4 and go Monday through Friday instead of Monday through Thursday or Tuesday through Friday? I don't even remember what the original plan was. But originally it was 4 days stripped. And so I took that to my bosses, Bruce Cranston and Gary Kreisel, and I said, can we do this? And Gary said, well, it makes some sense to strip across the week as opposed to 4 days out of the week. Which day aren't we going to do? It was either going to be Monday or Friday, and neither made a hell of a lot of sense. I guess, skipping Friday you'd think makes sense, but we were going to be a once-a-week show on Fridays. So that was even a little weird. And then So he went to Buena Vista and said, "Hey, can we do this?" And they said, "Sure." And then it did bite us in the ass a bit later when, again, I'm sure we'll talk about when we get to Enter Macbeth. The original animation for Enter Macbeth came back and really, it had been subcontracted out to a different studio. And it came back in really problematic shape. And unfortunately, it also happened to be the episode where the gargoyles moved from the castle to the clock tower. So we couldn't air the episodes that followed it, even if they were ready. Like someone suggested, just put the next episode ahead, because if it had been DuckTales, what difference would it have made? You know, if it had been Tailspin, do this adventure before that adventure. No one's going to know. And, you know, if it had been a different episode, we might have been able to get away with that. But it just happened to be the one where our heroes changed their base of operation. And it didn't work. And so we had to do a rerun for a week. But when you do that, you don't want to take the most recent episode you've aired. You go back to the first one. And then Buena Vista said, well, if we air the first part of the pilot, we might as well just take 5 weeks and air episodes 1 through 5 weekly in case anyone missed that first week. So that meant that we wound up with instead of a 1 week hiatus, we were supposed to have a 0 week hiatus. We wound up, because of the trouble on Enter Macbeth, needing a 1 or 2 week hiatus, and wound up taking a 5 week hiatus, which was much longer than we needed. But, that was the result of us, not having come up with the tentpole system, which we'll talk about in season 2, and sort of getting stuck with just happening to have the one episode that we needed to transition was the one that came out problematic. But the switch from 4 episodes to 5 for the pilot, just at the time seemed like it made sense. And it wasn't a big fight. It wasn't like I had to fight to switch from 4 to 5. I had to talk to a hell of a lot of people, but everyone sort of agreed, yeah, this is good. We've got enough story. We've got enough content here. And I think the structure isn't quite as elegant. It was structured for 4, and then spreading it out across 5. The episodes don't always end in the most ideal place, but I think all that really comes down to me knowing stuff that the audience would never know. So I think for the most part, it seems to work really well. And I definitely love the way this episode ends. I mean, it really ends on this sort of tragic note here, and gives us the breathing room to finish the Dark Ages story in the next episode.
There was something else I noticed in this, and it actually happens at the end of the first 4 parts of Awakening, and this is something that I know you, because you're one of your catchphrases on social media is spoiler request, no comment. I do not think if you had any say you would ever run a next time on Gargoyles, or next time on Spider-Man, or next time on Young Justice ever again.
Yeah, that's not my thing, but back then I didn't know how much I would wind up hating spoilers. Honestly, I didn't. I mean, back in those days, or even years later when Ask Greg first started, I was giving up spoilers right and left. What the hell did I know? But I think what was important to everybody on the business side of things, and to me also to some extent, was to remind the audience, remember we started in the present, and you hopefully got lost in the story in the past. So we wanted, I think, actively to say, coming up, remember, we're going back to the present. Don't think it's all going to be a medieval show. It's not. And we felt that we had captured the audience enough in our past story that they might literally have forgotten that the whole thing opened with Elisa and masonry falling from a Manhattan skyscraper. And so we wanted to have a little bit to show, hey, there's more to this story in the past, but really to show, hey, there's a helicopter, there's this, there's that. This story is going to continue in the present. And then again, we hadn't used the main title at the beginning because it would have scooped too much of our surprises if it had been at the opening. But, you had to build time for a main title. And so we have this extra time. So we just put it at the end, which is weird, but that's what we did.
All right. Thank you for everything, Greg. And before we wrap up, is there anything you would like to plug?
I'm working on the 4th season of Young Justice. I honestly do not know when it's premiering yet, but we have 17 episodes in the can. We've got 6 more in post-production, and then the last 3 are still being animated overseas. Of course, by the time this airs, all that will have advanced even further, but that's all I'm working on right now.
All right. Jen, is there anything you want to plug?
Nope. I go to my website, heyaspet.com. If you go to my Etsy, I do have Phoenix Gate decals.
Go get them, and Pick Up Her Evil Shouldn't Look This Good card also. All right.
That's right. That's Sarah too.
I would like to thank everyone. Jen, thank you for being a great partner in crimes. But I would like to thank all of you for listening. Thank you, and thank you everyone for participating. And we will be back next time to move from one century and one continent to another and meet for the first time some little-known character named David Xanatos. You may never have heard of him. And once again, Ed Asner, thank you.
It is the nature of humankind to fear what they do not understand. Their ways are not our ways.